You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and special treat here for our third hour today. Professor Stephen Cohen. I have an honorary PhD from... maybe you could call me Dr. Hartman, Professor Cohen. Anyhow, Professor Stephen Cohen, New York University and Princeton University, contributing editor to The Nation magazine and author of Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives from Stalinism to the New Cold War, the website thenation.com. Professor Cohen, welcome back to the program.
My elderly aunt said when I got my PhD, all those years, and you could have been a real doctor.
Yeah.
So the PhD doesn't have a lot of currency in some circles.
Yeah, and mine was Goddard College. It was the first honorary PhD they'd done in the 100-year history of the college, so it was kind of a big deal. But
it is indeed. I congratulate you.
Thank you, but it's still an honorary PhD. So, but let's talk about Ukraine and what's going on there. I had an eye-popping. I was in Germany over the weekend, and one of the German newspapers, I think it was Der Bild, one of the German newspapers had an interesting article on the front page about how and correct me if I misunderstood this, because my German, I used to be fairly good. I lived in Germany back in 86 and 87, but I never studied it in school, and so it's nur Straßendeutsch, that's just street German. But my understanding of this article was basically that the industrial complex in the cities in the east part of Ukraine are almost exclusively military-industrial complex types of facilities, that they manufacture mostly weaponry for the Russian military, and that, in fact, there are several major Russian pieces of military equipment, a jet and a missile, as I recall, that literally the Russians can't make without the factories in the eastern part of Ukraine. Do I have that right?
More or less. But could I, since you mentioned Germany, could I mention that we're living through an astonishing and shameful moment before we begin?
Please.
Last Sunday, April 20th, there appeared on the front page of the New York Times a report by Peter Baker, which reported, and this is the astonishing news or the historic news, that President Obama, because of the Ukrainian crisis, has given up any hope of dealing in a positive way with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
I read that piece.
And therefore, President Obama has adopted a new strategy, as Baker calls it, a new policy, which is no longer to try to cooperate with Russia, but to treat Russia as a pariah state. And in this pursuit, to adopt or readopt, and this is the word that was reported and used, a policy of containment. Now, containment was, of course, the 45-year American policy during the preceding Cold War. Therefore, it seems right to say that this week, as we talk now, we, the United States, are now officially in a declared Cold War with Russia.
Assuming that this article, when I read the article as an op-ed, and I...
wait a minute, no, Tom, it appeared on the front page of the paper.
Okay, I read it on my phone. Sorry.
On the front page of the Times,
okay.
Column left is at the top.
Yeah.
Baker is a very authoritative reporting voice at the Times. Probably is their lead political reporter when it comes to Washington. But more importantly, there was not one word of denial or revision, nor has there been for the last 3 days from the White House. So we have to assume that Baker got the gist of the revised policy and discussion in the White House correct. Now, the other half of that, and this is what made me think of Germany and your visit there. In Germany today, for various reasons, there is a full political media debate about the Ukrainian crisis and who, Russia, Europe, or the United States, bears most responsibility for it, and therefore great uncertainty about what Western policy should be. That's democracy working. In the United States, there has not been one public word from any member of our media political establishment, Republican, Democratic, reactionary, progressive, not a word in the mainstream. Now, by mainstream, I mean those publications and those radio shows and those broadcasts that our policy elite reads and watches, shapes, and is shaped by it. Mm. And there you have either full-throated cheerleading. Look at most any Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, full-throated support for this new militarization of relations with Russia, or silence. So I think future historians will look back and say two things, if there are any future historians, because there's going to be an arms race now. One, this is the week that the United States officially declared Cold War on Russia, though it's been unfolding for 20 years. And two, the so-called democratic American bipartisan political system was absent. It's a shameful day, a shameful week, and there are people such as yourself. There's John Batchelor on ABC. There's Democracy Now! There are important broadcasts that put on alternative voices, dissenting voices. But if they impact the mainstream, policy mainstream, it's only over a long period of time. And by then, as we see now, a long time is too late. So that's where we stand today. And meanwhile, of course, we are sending NATO troops, American troops too, deeper into Eastern Europe. It's not a large force, 175 paratroopers as reported, also in the Times today, but elsewhere, into Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, on Russia's borders. Right. It's not really clear how many there'll be altogether yet, but there's symbolic importance.
And Poland is the big concern.
Well, Poland is the big one. And, of course, nobody pays any attention to what President Putin says, but he discussed all this at length in the last 2 weeks. And he says if this keeps up, there's no way we can avoid a new nuclear arms race. He was referring at that moment to American warships sailing in and out of the Black Sea in range of Russia, carrying anti-missile devices, anti-ballistic missile devices, which Russia interprets as a threat to deprive it of its nuclear deterrence. Therefore, in all likelihood, Russia will begin to deploy and build more of those so-called intermediate-range missiles, which were the only category of nuclear weapons ever abolished, for all Obama's talk about this. And they were abolished, of course, by Gorbachev and Reagan in 1987, I think. They are coming back.
Wow. Wow. Now, this article that I read in Germany, my takeaway from it was that it was almost like they were saying Russia needs these Eastern Ukrainian cities to make their weapons, and therefore maybe we should not be so quick to jump in and be so rigid about these borders or whatever. I mean, it was like this is an issue we need to seriously consider. I've heard no discussion like that in the United States.
But what if that's the purpose of Western policy, to deprive Russia of its military-industrial base in Ukraine?
Oh, my God.
Then you would say, is it successful or not?
Then I'd say the neocons have won.
They have won. What we're living with now are the consequences. But the neocons aren't just Republicans.
Right.
They're Democrats.
Sure. Yeah, they are totally transpartisan. We'll be back with more of Professor Stephen Cohen, Professor Emeritus at New York University and Princeton University, contributing editor to The Nation magazine, author of the book Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives, From Stalinism to the perhaps prophetically titled New Cold War. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And you can read Professor Cohen's writing, of course, over at thenation.com. So, Professor Cohen, if we have entered into a new Cold War with Russia, what does that mean? How does that change the average life of America? I remember the old Cold War. I'm old enough to remember duck and cover. I remember all the demagoguery. I remember all the tax money going to the nuclear missiles and all that kind of stuff. But what will that mean this time?
Well, when I saw this coming back in February, I called a friend down in the small town in Kentucky where I grew up and asked him if the nuclear fallout shelter that my father had built back in the 1950s was still functioning. And just, the cat and I might exile ourselves in Kentucky. That's a joke to remind us that my generation and yours, I'm probably a generation older than you.
I'm 63.
Well,
I was born in 51.
It depends on, we consider generation 20 years, political generation.
Right.
So we would be of the same generation, but I'm older than you.
Okay.
But we both remember, that's the point, and my grown children remember what it meant to grow up during the Cold War. On a personal level, we lived with the anxiety of nuclear war. As a nation, we lived with expenditures that gutted our social progress. We lived with international politics that corrupted our domestic politics. But I would say, not only would I say it, I insist that this new Cold War, if it's allowed to develop, and it's hard to see how it can be stopped now, because whatever we think of Putin, whatever we think of him, there is zero leadership coming out of the White House. If it develops, it will be more dangerous, by which I mean more apt to lead to actual war, conventional or nuclear, than was the last Cold War, for two reasons. The epicenter of the last Cold War was rather far from Russia, in Berlin, divided Berlin.
Right.
This Cold War is right on Russia's borders in Ukraine, and not only on its borders, but through the heart, to the extent that Ukraine is divided, as it is, through the heart of Russia's traditional, historical, Slavic civilization. So this is an open wound that you can't put a Band-Aid on, unlike Berlin, unlike Eastern and Central Europe. The other reason is, and I probably remember this better than you do, during the last Cold War, the 45-year Cold War, rules of stabilizing behavior developed, particularly after the Cuban Missile Crisis, when both sides, Soviet and America, realized that the other had red lines that the other and each dare not cross for fear of launching real war. So we went into the business of back-channel communications. We negotiated a lot of treaties that required informing each other about troop movements. There was the hotline was installed. So a whole series, a kind of gossamer world of stabilizing behavior and mechanisms were created. None of that exists now. None of it exists. And what will, if you read, I read only the Russian and the American press. Both are so full of misinformation that when I finish my daily 2 hours reading of the press, I am so angry because it would take 2 weeks to correct what appears, whether it's in a Russian newspaper or the New York Times, particularly in the opinion columns.
Yeah, to untangle it all. We're talking with Professor Stephen Cohen. He writes for the contributing editor to thenation.com and professor emeritus at NYU and Princeton. And author of Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program, Talk Media for the sane left among us. Professor Stephen Cohen on the line with us. He is the professor emeritus at New York University and Princeton University, contributing editor with The Nation magazine, the author of the book, perhaps presciently titled, at least toward the end, Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives from Stalinism to the New Cold War, which was apparently declared over the weekend, as we were talking a little earlier, thenation.com for his writings, of course. Professor Cohen, we were just talking about what might this new Cold War look like and what we both remembered from our childhood, our younger years. The probably the seminal event of my teenage years was a proxy war that was part of the Cold War, which was Vietnam. What are your thoughts on first of all, do you think that that's a reasonable analysis of what Vietnam was? And secondly, might we be looking at that sort of thing where we're going to war with Russia, but we're not really going to war with Russia, and it's happening someplace else, maybe someplace in Africa?
We've already had one example of that, and we don't have to be older guys, senior citizens, which you're not quite, to remember it.
Bless you.
In 2008, everybody think back to 2008. It wasn't that long ago. There was a war, a brief war, in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia between the Russian army and the Georgian army, an army that had been created, armed, and minded by the United States. That was surely a proxy war. I wrote about it at the time, and I called it the American-Russian proxy war. The reason that's relevant now is that it was there in Georgia that the United States and NATO crossed one of the two declared lines, red lines of Russia. That is, taking Georgia into NATO. That's what that was all about. And Russia put a stop to that then. Now, Moscow believes that the United States and NATO have crossed the other and far more important red line in Ukraine. So might we see a proxy war in Ukraine? Now, if you can allow me one moment of self-advertisement, I have at thenation.com my most recent article. It's called Cold War Again, Who is Responsible? And there I set out the history leading up to this new Cold War. And I argue it's not the official history or narrative we're getting in the mainstream. You got to see the other guy's side of the story, the Russian side of the story. And the Russian side of the story is that we've been coming at them with NATO for 20 years, began with Clinton, the expansion, and now there's an assault, a march for the brass ring, the great prize, Ukraine. Now, what might that mean, to go back to your question? I think everybody would agree, even the White House, that Ukraine is on the verge of civil war, because Ukraine might have been one state, but it was never one country. It was at least two, the West leaning toward Europe, the East toward Russia. It may already be civil war. People are being killed mysteriously, showing up in rivers. Buildings are being occupied, both in the West, which we ignore, and in the East. If there's an actual civil war, almost certainly Putin will send Russian troops across the eastern border from Russia into Ukraine. And those NATO troops, which we see being mobilized in Eastern Europe, will be sent into Western Ukraine. And therefore, you could argue theoretically that a Ukrainian civil war will become a proxy war between Russia and the United States. But I would say, wait a minute. If NATO crosses Ukraine's borders and Russia crosses Ukraine's borders, we are at the Cuban Missile Crisis. We are eyeball to eyeball. And at that moment, then we're a bad thought, a mishap, a misunderstanding from actual war between Russia and America. That's why I think we've got to think this through, so that when President Obama lets it be known, he's not going to talk to Putin anymore. By the way, he once referred to Putin as a kind of sulky schoolboy. Why he would say this in public, I have no idea. But he did. But who's sulking now? He appears to be sulking in the White House because the White House thinks that Putin has, done them in.
Yeah.
If you believe in this crazy game, this chessboard, this lethal strategic nonsense that both sides pursue, Putin's been winning. We don't have a win, and it's almost as though his feelings are hurt, and he's only going to talk about Obamacare.
Is there a? We just have a couple of minutes left, Professor. Is there in Ukraine some equivalent of the 38th parallel in Korea, a logical place for troops on both sides to stop?
Probably Kiev, because it's the capital, because in the eyes of the Russians, the government, which came to power through a street coup and overthrew the president, has no legitimacy. By the same token, the United States and Europe have embraced the Kiev government. So I would guess the 38th parallel will be wherever that Kiev government is. If it flees Ukraine, and by the way, as we've seen this week, it has no support. It sent military troops to the east to deoccupy some buildings, and the troops handed their tanks and their guns and everything over to the people who were protecting the people who were occupying the buildings.
Right.
It will need NATO power to survive. So wherever it is, that will be the line. But, a Ukrainian civil war will be everywhere. And let me end by saying this. The relationship between Ukraine and Russia is also conjugal. There are tens of millions of mixed marriages. This civil war is going to run through the bedroom of every house in Ukraine. It never should have happened, and it was provoked by Europe and the United States, not by Putin, but he is now Mr. Pushback.
Yeah. And in fact, for his own political survival, he's going to have to maintain that position.
I'll let you think that, but if you want to have a conversation of Putin's motives, we ought to do that on another broadcast, because that has become the prevailing view, that either he's determined to rebuild the Soviet Union, or he must do this because he's weak at home and he has to shore up his popular...
You don't think either of those are the case?
Either is correct. They are factors in any politician's thinking, especially one who's in a war situation. He thinks of his support. Everybody, Putin polls every day the way Obama does, but that's not the driving force.
That's fascinating. Do you have the ability and time to stick around with us for a little bit, or do you have...
What could be more important?
Okay, if you're willing to stick around with us, we've got to take a 6-minute break here at the bottom of the hour for the news, but then we'll continue the conversation. Okay?
Are we off the air?
We are not off the air. No.
When we go off the air, I want to ask a question.
Okay, we'll do.
You're
Hang on just a
listening
second.
to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 866-987-THOM.
I hope we will be back with Professor Cohen. We'll find out in a second. It's 28 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Professor Stephen Cohen, Professor Emeritus at New York University and Princeton University, contributing editor to The Nation magazine, author of the book Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives, From Stalinism to the New Cold War, and author of a new article in The Nation. You can read it at thenation.com, Cold War Again, Who's Responsible? The subtitle, In the Name of, quote, Democracy, the West has unrelentingly moved its military, political, and economic power ever closer to post-Soviet Russia. A very provocative subtitle and a brilliant article. Steve, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom.
And thank you so much for agreeing to stay with us here for the rest of this hour.
Nothing could be more important given the circumstances.
I agree. We're talking about the last two major nuclear powers doing a dance that is at least as dangerous as the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it seems to me that the big difference is that during the Cuban Missile Crisis, most Americans realized the gravity of the situation, and today most Americans are, wondering what's Miley Cyrus going to do tomorrow.
I have a view about that because I hear this in Russia too. I spend a good deal of time in Moscow, where the Russian intelligentsia, they would say you and I are members of the American intelligentsia, though I don't think we really have one. We know what they're talking about. Yeah. They tend to blame ordinary people, which is not unreasonable in a democracy. I mean, you might say, why don't ordinary people put a stop to this? But this is really the fault in the doing of our policy elite, whom nobody elected except for those in Congress and the White House. They are what the Russians used to call a nomenklatura, an appointed class. These are people who rotate in and out of government, in and out of editorial positions. It doesn't matter a whole lot if they're Republicans or Democrats. This is what they do. And they get paid well, and it's not hard manual labor. And my view has always been that in a democracy, they have one obligation, and that is to be critical-minded and factual. And they are the opposite of that in this run-up to war with Russia. And I won't mention names because I have friendly relations with some of these people. I've been around a long time and spent part of my life not only in universities, but I worked for CBS once. I used to write for American op-ed pages. I've been in and out of the media. But it is scandalous, the silence of the mainstream media and the politicians today. There's no precedent for it. We had a debate in the run-up of Vietnam, of Iraq, when there was almost a war with Iran and with Libya. There was a debate. But it appears that when it comes to Russia now, they have either lost their minds or their courage. And I would ask you a question. It's a hypothetical question. First, a factual question. How many elected members of Congress are there total? You got, 400 plus?
435 in the House and 100 in the Senate.
All right, so what's the total number there?
535.
All right, of 535 people, I have heard one publicly question 1.5 publicly questioned American policy toward Russia over Ukraine since the crisis began in November, almost 6 months ago. And that is a person I don't know personally by the name of, I think, Dana Rauschenbacher.
Rohrabacher, yeah.
Rohrabacher.
And he walked it back, as I recall.
Well, he may have, but in the beginning, Rand Paul also said he thought we were bringing this, that we had built a bridge too far toward Russia.
Right.
But because Rubio is taking a hard line, and Rand would like to run in the primaries, Republican primaries, he's fallen silent. So as we talk today, not one of, what did you say the number was, 500 and plus?
535, yes.
530, not one of 535 elected national officials have said, wait a minute, before we do what appears the White House has announced, new Cold War, and moving NATO troops all over the place, could we please take a deep breath and maybe have a few days of discussion and debate about this? Much less oppose it. Not one.
Is that not happen? I mean, no. Again, my German is terrible, but my sense this weekend when I was in Germany and from reading the newspapers and talking to friends was that they're actually having that conversation, at least in Germany.
No, but that's my point, my comparative point, that conversation is taking place in Germany, but you and I aren't German citizens.
Right.
And
Putin is talking to Angela Merkel instead of to Barack Obama.
Yeah, but what about our own country? I mean, progressives go on and on and on about American democracy, but progressive politicians aren't speaking out. Some of them call me on the phone and say they're worried, and I say, well, Senator, well, Congressperson, you should be worried. Why don't you ask some public questions? Go on a network that's always trying to get you on and say you'd like things to slow down and have a discussion. Not a peep. There's not a profile of courage. Not one. And how in a democracy that can be possible among nearly 600 elected national representatives? I don't know of a governor who's spoken out either. And by the way, people who once ran for the American presidency, I'm thinking of some Democrats, we don't need to name them, who once opposed this policy, they too are silent now.
Well, I'm reminded of, I think Barbara Lee was the only person in the House who voted against the resolution to go into Iraq or Afghanistan, one or the other.
Yes.
I mean,
it's
like history repeats
itself.
itself.
About American democracy, but it's also an omen of where we're headed, because when there is no resistance at all, the people who probably believe in this crazy policy will pursue it. And I should say, not only is there a debate in Germany, but even in the much despised Russian mass media. The Times had a big article last week that the Russian media was full of misinformation and exaggerations, and I said, yes. Now, could you have a line where you said, and some of this also appears in the American media, but you aren't going to read that in the New York Times. Right. Putin has been criticized for his policy toward Ukraine. Not a lot, but he has been criticized, and I will give you an example. The leading Russian, I would say, anti-Putin newspaper, it's called Novaya Gazeta, the new Gazeta, or the new newspaper. That's the paper whose correspondents, so many of them, have been assassinated over the years. It's a very democratic newspaper. It has a fairly big circulation, an enormous website. They published my Nation article, the one you just mentioned. They published it, and they said, we have to have a discussion in Russia. At the same time, I can't get on the New York Times op-ed page, and I can give you several people far more eminent than am I, with bigger credentials, but with the same views, who can't get on that page. You can forget the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. And as for the talk shows on television, every now and then one of us pops up, fleetingly, briefly, but our voices are drowned out, and now you know we're in trouble when they're bringing the generals on to discuss this.
Yes.
As CNN and NBC are now doing. They don't want to talk to civilians anymore. They can sniff a war when they know one. They want the generals. And, of course, the generals have one piece of advice. Their only dispute is whether you send in 175 paratroopers or 175,000 ground troops. That's their only dispute.
Or which type of missile to use. And the other thing that they don't do is they don't disclose that most of these generals who are experts on these, particularly the cable networks, are also employees as consultants or on the board of directors of the large defense corporations.
You asked before what this might mean if this Cold War gets entrenched.
Right.
And I said it's going to be more dangerous, and I'm worried at the moment not about Cold War because we're in it. We're in it. but about the possibility of hot war with Russia, either via civil war in Ukraine, or somebody kills an American paratrooper in Eastern Europe, or a sniper kills a Russian officer on the borders. Because all these mysterious killings are going on, and each side it's done by guys in black masks, and nobody knows who's really behind it, but each side believes the worst of the other. But, what we know, even if there's not hot war, is that it's going to mean a lot more military expenditures here, a lot more surveillance, a lot more kind of militant priorities in our budgetary discussions. It's going to mean skewing our educational system to the know thy enemy, the way it was for 45 years. But it will be good for some people, as you say. It's good for some businesses, so to speak.
Yes.
But it's
Jackson Brown.
The rest of us, and I've got grandkids, so I'm thinking long term.
Yeah. Now, in my youth, we actually believed there was a possibility that a hot war with Russia meant that a nuclear bomb would land on New York and Detroit, and that ours would land on Moscow and
yes,
Kaliningrad. What kind of probability do you assign to that sort of thing?
Here's what I see the worst scenario being, and it's twofold. Our leaders, if they know the truth, and you never know if a president and his or her advisors know the truth and are lying, or just if they're misinformed. I lead toward the misinformed theory, but that's their responsibility for appointing bad advisors.
Right.
One of the things they told us when the Soviet Union ended was that the danger of nuclear war, except for a terrorist act, was gone. Just the opposite was true. The Russian system of command and control was in great shape when the Soviet Union ended. It's been in lousy shape since then. Another number of people have written articles and books about mishaps where the Russians mistook a large seagull on their radar for an incoming missile and practically went to launch, retaliatory launch. So I wouldn't want to stress the Russian system of command and control, which has been badly damaged by nearly 20 years of economic depression and disintegration in Russia.
So in other words, we could have an all-out, full-blown nuclear war by accident.
The thing is, the logical thing to have done, even if you couldn't reduce nuclear weapons, was to take all nuclear weapons off high alert. High alert means that the chain of command has 14 minutes, I will repeat, 14 minutes, to decide whether to launch in retaliation or not. In other words, whether the material, the information they're getting from their radar systems, their satellites, is accurate or not. 14 minutes. It takes my daughter nearly 14 hours to decide which movie she's going to go to. This is preposterous.
I understand.
Put us on the razor edge. Nothing should be on high alert. The warhead should be taken off so it takes 48 hours or more to put them back on. What's going to happen in those 48 hours? That's the first danger.
Hold that thought, please. We will be back with more of Professor Cohen.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Be sure to check out Stephen Cohen's new piece. It's in thenation.com. The title is Cold War Again. Who's responsible? We'll be right back. And we're back. We're back on the air. Steve,
Can we go to the second nuclear danger here?
Yeah, please.
So the first is accidental, and particularly on the part of the Russians, who are wired to the nth degree and nervous and expecting a stab in the back and are not fully in control.
But we've had situations where, that plane carried 4 fully armed nuclear weapons across the United States. We didn't, we've had our share of screw-ups too, right?
Well, Tom, the fact that they can't find the Malaysian airliner should remind us of the fallibility of our supposedly infallible technology.
Sure.
All right, but let's go to a more practical scenario. Russians, and this didn't begin with Putin, it evolved under our dear friend Boris Yeltsin, the first president of post-Soviet Russia, have made it absolutely clear in their military doctrine that if they are overrun by the West's superior conventional forces, and the West forces, conventional forces, that means non-nuclear, are superior, they reserve the right to resort to tactical nuclear weapons. Now, remember what tactical nuclear weapons are. They're sometimes called battlefield nuclear weapons. They can be launched from, hand-carried launchers, from tanks, anything that can shoot an artillery shell, can fire almost anything, a tactical nuclear weapon. Russia has enormous supplies, and it is warned that if they are overrun by conventional forces from the West, they will resort to these.
Now, a tactical nuke does what? It takes out a small city? I mean, how big an explosion is it?
I don't know, but it emits radioactive material in the air and makes the area unlivable for the foreseeable future. Think of it like this. If those airliners that attacked us on 9/11, if those guys had managed to carry a very, very small suitcase-sized tactical nuclear weapon onto those planes, you wouldn't even be able to visit the Twin Towers area today. It would be radioactive. Right. So regardless of how many people it would kill from the blast, it would make the area unlivable, a large area. So you're in a situation now where the Russians are very nervous. They see us coming at them, paratroopers landing, Joe Biden in Kiev, the head of the CIA, for God's sake, 2 weeks ago Sunday, sitting in Kiev. What was he doing there? They see threats. They see an American-run threat. Are they paranoid? Well, the answer is Delmore Schwartz, the famous poet. Even paranoids have enemies.
Right.
I mean, Russia does have enemies.
I mean, how would we respond if the head of the it's not called the KGB anymore, but whatever it is, and President Putin were visiting with Fidel Castro?
Well, what if they showed up at Occupy Wall Street? That would be the equivalent. McCain went to the demonstrations in Kiev.
Yeah.
Victoria Nuland, the top State Department official, went there, and we heard her on the phone plotting a coup.
And I understand she's married to Kagan, the neocon?
Yeah, but I don't do spousal associations. They're complicated. But she is. Yeah, she's married to Robert Kagan. She is herself a neocon, a philosophical outlook. But, I mean, if we say the Russians are intervening in Ukraine. Now, look at it from the Russian point of view. McCain and who's that Democratic senator from Connecticut?
Lieberman.
No, Lieberman's gone.
Oh.
His replacement, the younger guy.
Yeah. Blumenthal, is it?
He went, no.
No, I'm sorry, I don't remember.
But he went with McCain, so it was bipartisan.
Oh, my.
Then Joe Biden shows up in Kiev, and before that, the head of the CIA. Now, what if the vice president of Russia, Medvedev, let's say, the prime minister, came to the United States to sit down with Occupy Wall Street?
We'd go nuts.
We would have long since launched.
Yeah, we would have gone totally nuts.
Of behavioral equivalence.
Professor Stephen Cohen with us. We'll be right back with more of Professor Cohen. Thom Hartmann here. I'm coming to Portland on May 2nd to the First Unitarian Church in the Main Street Sanctuary, Fuller Hall. I'll be giving a talk starting at 7 p.m. about my new book, The Crash of 2016. The United States is in the midst of an economic implosion that could make the Great Depression look like child's play. Find out what we need to do right away. Before and after the event, local groups active in the actions will be in Fuller Hall to meet with attendees to provide points of entry for the fight. There's more details at firstunitarianportland.org or ThomHartman.com. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. The article dated April 1st, the most recent article in thenation.com by Stephen F. Cohen, Cold War Again, Who's Responsible? Professor Cohen, Professor Emeritus at New York University in Princeton, and author of Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives, from Stalinism to the New Cold War, as well as this new article, Cold War Again, Who's Responsible? One of the conversational threads that we began as we were ending the first half hour, because we just have about 7 minutes here left, and I want to get back to this, is motivational. You suggested that the common storylines of what's driving Mr. Putin are wrong, and I have no idea what the motive of Mr. Obama is. Your thoughts on these?
Well, it's an important point. If you look at the American media today, and I just will give you two examples, which I found in the newspaper and in a magazine yesterday. I mean the mainstream American print media and the broadcast media. One of two motivations are said to be behind, quote, Putin's aggressive policies toward Ukraine. I actually don't think they're very aggressive. I think they're pushback. I mean, you could ask, was he reactive to something we did beginning in November or longer before? Or did he start this? He clearly didn't start this, and he clearly didn't want it. But what's animating him now? And the two explanations are, I think, either false or very partial. One is that he's trying to restore the Soviet Union because he once said it was a terrible event. He didn't actually say exactly what he's quoted as saying, but never mind. He did say it was a catastrophe, which, by the way, it was for millions of people who lived in that area. In fact, Ukraine is part of the fallout of the end of the Soviet Union, and it is becoming catastrophic. The second reason given for Putin's, quote, aggressive policies toward Ukraine is that he's weak at home, and he has to shore up his popular support at home, and then you get a flip to the old Western scenario, that when a Western leader is weak, a little war comes in handy.
Yeah.
These are the two explanations.
Reagan and Grenada.
But, it's been around political, strategists, as they call themselves for some reason now, that a little war could always help an unpopular leader in any country. About the Soviet Union, Putin once said the following. He didn't originate it, but I think it's the way maybe 65% of Russians feel. Anyone who does not regret the end of the Soviet Union has no heart. Anyone who thinks we can rebuild the Soviet Union has no head. I think that pretty much is the Russian point of view. Why has no heart? Because Putin and his generation, and quite a few others, were born in the Soviet Union. They grew up. They got their education. They found their first job. They had sex for the first time. They fell in love. They got married. They raised their kids. They made their careers. That's their biography, their autobiography. Of course you regret loss of your biography. Any people would. Why can it not be rebuilt? Because there would be no point in doing it. All those republics were mainly a burden on Russia, draining its resources. Secondly, that's not even the geopolitical concern of Russia. So now we come to what Putin's real motivation is. He doesn't want to rebuild the Soviet Union, but he doesn't want to lose to NATO, to the West, Russia's traditional national security zones. And they are twofold. Georgia in the south, which is the road to the Caucasus, and the Caucasus is where many of Russia's 15 million or more, 25 million, I think, Muslim Islamic citizens live. It's a multicultural society. To have that open to a NATO base or a political movement by the West in that underbelly of Russia would be a catastrophe. Anybody, any American journal could tell you that was so. That's why they're so eager to get there. But above all, Ukraine. For historical, cultural reasons. But remember, we're all upset that Putin annexed, or as Putin would say, reunited Crimea. What was Crimea? It was the Russian deep-sea naval base. And they believed, Moscow, that the plan coming from the West that they had witnessed in Ukraine since November was to take over the entirety of Ukraine, including Crimea. And that if they didn't bring it into the Russian Federation now, tomorrow might be too late. Now, you can say, what a crazy notion the Russians had. But then you got to back up and ask, did we do anything to put that crazy notion in their head? And if we did, then the people who did that on our side are responsible for the crisis we're now in. End of story. But there is nobody in the United States who wants to ask this question or analyze it. I will give you one example. Back in November, it was said, when the European Union offered Ukraine this agreement to become a prosperous democratic member of the European market, that was a benign offer, and Putin and the Ukrainian leadership rejected it. It is not true. First of all, Europe told Ukraine it had to choose between Russia and the West. Why? Why? Russia was prepared to give aid to Ukraine, financial aid, along with the West. That was rejected. But if you read the agreement, which is 1,000 pages long, Title 7 and Title 9 are called security issues. And though NATO is not mentioned, it makes it very clear that by signing this benign democratic economic agreement, Ukraine would oblige itself to follow the military and security policies of Europe, of the European Union. What are those policies? It's called NATO.
Right.
And it houses in Brussels. The Russians can read.
Yeah, and they would be, just from a security point of view, they'd be crazy to go along with it. Professor Cohen, Steve, thank you so much for your insights and your brilliant writing, and for being on the program.
When there's some good news.
Yeah, let's hope so.
But there may never be again.
Yeah, well, we'll keep talking. Professor Stephen Cohen, thank you. You can read it over at The Nation. Cold War Again, Who's Responsible? TheNation.com. And, of course, his book, Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives from Stalinism to the New Cold War. Highly recommend.